My name is Calvin Reeves, and at 64 years old, I learned that the people who claim to love you can make you invisible without ever raising their voice. Last spring, at my father-in-law's 80th birthday celebration, my wife's family seated me at the farthest table, right beside the door. Then my brother-in-law introduced me to a room full of guests with three words that had followed me for years: a retired nobody. I had heard that phrase for almost 20 years. I had swallowed it at dinners, holidays, graduations, and family gatherings until it almost sounded normal. But I never imagined that the man, or rather the woman, about to walk through that door would make every person in that room regret ever saying it. Before I take you into that hall, let me take you back to the Saturday afternoon when everything I had quietly swallowed for 2 decades finally rose to the surface. The invitation arrived on heavy cream-colored paper, the kind Walter Hargrove always liked because it looked expensive without needing to say so. Diane opened it at the kitchen table while I poured coffee. I knew something was wrong before she said a word. After 24 years of marriage, I had learned the little silences that crossed her face when her family had done something cruel, and expected her to call it harmless. I asked her what it was. She slid the printed program across the table toward me. There was a schedule for the birthday celebration, a list of speakers, and a gold-lettered line that read, "Celebrating the Hargrove Legacy." My name was not on the speaker list. It was not on the list of family being honored. In the one place where it did appear, beside Diane's name, it was spelled wrong, like an afterthought attached to hers. Diane said softly that they had misspelled my name. I told her they had been doing that for years. I tried to smile when I said it, because a man learns to turn little cuts into jokes when everyone around him insists they are too small to count. Then the phone rang. It was Bradley. I put it on speaker. He sounded bright and casual, the way he always did when he was about to be insulting and pretend it was logistics. He told me seating was a little tight for Saturday and that I could come whenever because they would find me a spot. I repeated the words back to him. Find me a spot. He laughed and said I knew how it was, that a lot of important people were coming. Then he hung up before I could answer. Diane reached across the table and took my hand. I looked down at that program again. For 24 years, I had stood inside that family. I had attended every graduation, every funeral, every holiday dinner, every Thanksgiving, where I carved the turkey because no one else wanted to stand there long enough to do it. And now, for the biggest family event of the year, there was a printed schedule, and I had been folded out of it like a wrinkle in a tablecloth. I did not need a microphone. I did not need applause. I just had not expected to be erased completely. Diane said maybe it was a mistake, but both of us knew her father did not make those kinds of mistakes. Walter Hargrove made decisions. This one had my name attached to it, even if he could not be bothered to spell it correctly. To understand why that program hurt, you need to understand what gatherings with the Hargroves were like. The birthday program was not new cruelty. It was only the latest verse of an old song. I married Diane when I was 40. She was 36, warm, stubborn, and the only soft thing in a family built out of hard edges. Her father, Walter, had built a chain of hardware stores and measured every man by the size of his bank statement. Her brother Bradley had learned that lesson well. He wore success like cologne, spraying it around every room before anyone had asked. The questions always started after the second glass of wine. Someone would lean toward me and ask what I had actually done again. I would say I worked in infrastructure policy at the state level, roads, bridges, long-term transportation planning. I would say I was retired now, and almost every time, their eyes would slide away. Roads were boring. Bridges were useful, but they did not sparkle at dinner. They did not impress people who only respected work when it came with a glossy office, a luxury car, or a deal number large enough to repeat out loud. Bradley made a sport of reminding everyone of that. He would put his arm around my shoulder and announce to the whole table that he closed million-dollar deals while Calvin closed desk drawers. People laughed. They always laughed. It was easier than thinking about what they were laughing at. Vanessa, Bradley's wife, used a gentler knife. She would smile at me with bright eyes and say she worried I must be so bored now, with all that time and nothing to fill it. I would nod and refill the water glasses because somebody had to. For years, I told myself it did not matter. I had done work I was proud of, quiet work that did not need my face attached to it. Bridges carried school buses across rivers. Roads got ambulances to towns in time. Small places stayed connected because someone had stayed late with maps, numbers, budgets, flood tables, and safety reports. None of it had my face on it, and that was exactly how I had wanted it. But sitting in that kitchen with Walter's program in front of me, I began to understand something I had refused to admit. They did not think I was modest. They thought I was empty. The silence I had chosen as a principle, they had read as proof that I had nothing worth saying. And on Saturday, in front of everyone, Walter planned to make that official. The week before the party, Diane drove out to her father's house. When she came home, her jaw was tight and she dropped her keys on the counter harder than she meant to. She said her father was reorganizing things. I asked what things. She said the family trust, the care plan for when he could no longer manage everything himself, the paperwork around the houses, the store proceeds, and the money that would take care of Walter in his later years before passing down through the family. She said he wanted someone reliable to oversee it, someone with a head for money. I said Bradley's name before she did. Diane said her father had not said that exactly, but both of us had heard what had not been said. For 2 decades, I had quietly handled the family's taxes, their insurance forms, their records, their forms, the paperwork nobody else wanted to understand until something went wrong. I had never asked for payment. I had never asked for gratitude. I had simply done it because Diane loved her family, and because I believed service did not need a spotlight. Now Walter was deciding who counted as family enough to be trusted with the future, and the spelling on that birthday program told me exactly where I ranked. Diane said her father was going to announce something at the party, a decision about the future. I sat with that for a while. It was not about money for me. I had my pension. Diane and I were fine. It was the word trusted. Walter was about to stand up in front of everyone we knew and declare, in his own quiet way, that after 24 years, the man his daughter married still could not be trusted with anything that mattered. I asked Diane what she wanted me to do. She did not answer right away. That silence scared me more than anything Bradley had ever said. At last she whispered that she did not know, and that she only did not want a scene. I nodded, but something cold had settled in my chest, because I was starting to wonder how long a man could stay quiet before the silence stopped being dignity and started being surrender. The first strange phone call came on a Tuesday. I was in the garage when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but it had a capital city area code. I almost let it go. When I answered, a young woman's voice asked very politely whether she was speaking to Calvin Reeves. I said she was. She asked me to hold for one moment and said she was calling from the state office regarding something, but the line crackled and dropped before she finished. I stood there holding the phone, staring at the screen. The state office. I had not taken a call from anyone official in more than a decade. I told myself it was probably a wrong number. Maybe an intern with an old contact list. Maybe a file somewhere still had my name on it. I set the phone down and went back to fixing the lawnmower. That evening, our daughter Emma came home from college for the weekend. Emma was 22, sharp as a tack, and twice as quick to argue. She was digging through the hall closet looking for an old pair of soccer cleats when she pulled out a shoebox instead. A photograph had slipped halfway out from under the lid. In the picture, a younger version of me stood on a riverbank wearing a hard hat, surrounded by men in suits and a woman pointing at a set of blueprints. Emma asked what it was. I took the box gently from her hands and told her it was just old work stuff. She grinned and said I looked important. Then she asked whether I had been important. I laughed it off and told her somebody had to hold the blueprints. Then I put the box on the high shelf. Emma shrugged and went back to hunting for her cleats. But I stood there for a moment with my hand on that shelf, the strange phone call still rattling around inside my head. 2 small things had happened. A dropped call, a photograph. I told myself they meant nothing. I was wrong. I just did not understand how wrong until I was standing inside a crowded hall with the whole family watching. The hardest blow that week did not come from Walter or Bradley. It came from my own daughter, and she did not even know I heard it. On Sunday afternoon, the cousins came by. Emma was out on the back porch with Bradley's son Tyler and a couple of their friends. The kitchen window was open. I was inside refilling iced tea. Tyler asked whether Emma's dad was the quiet one. Then he said his dad called me the retired nobody. I waited for Emma to snap back. She always snapped back. That was her way. Instead, there was a pause. Then came a small, embarrassed laugh. Emma said I was nice, but that I had never really done anything big, you know. The picture went still in my hand. Then she added that I was just kind of there. She said it was fine. It was fine. Those were Vanessa's words, the same soft dismissal. My own girl, the one I had taught to ride a bike, the one I had taught to stand up for herself, the one I had told never to let anyone make her small, had absorbed it too. The family had been saying it for so long that even she believed it. I set the picture down very carefully so it would not rattle against the counter. I did not go outside. I did not want her to see my face. I went and sat in the den instead, in the dark, for a long time. I thought about all the years I had told myself that the work was enough, that dignity meant never bragging, never explaining, never demanding to be seen. I had worn my silence like a medal, and here was the cost of it, sitting on my back porch, calling me nobody and meaning no harm. For the first time in 20 years, I asked myself a dangerous question. What if staying quiet was not noble? What if it was only easy? Let me tell you why I stayed quiet for so long, because it was not for the reason the Hargroves imagined. When I was 25, fresh out of school, I worked under a man named Harold Briggs. Harold ran the regional engineering office, and he taught me everything that mattered. He had a rule he repeated like scripture. He said we worked for the people in the cars, not for the applause. He said the day a man built a bridge to be thanked, he would build a worse bridge. I believed him. I still do. So for 30 years, I did the work and let the work stand on its own. When a project I had fought for opened, I did not go to the ribbon cutting. I let the politicians hold the scissors. When a road I had designed kept people connected during a flood, I read about it in the paper like everyone else, and I felt quietly, privately proud. That was enough. I thought that was integrity. To serve, not to perform. What I never accounted for was this. The people closest to me would mistake my silence for emptiness. I had built a whole life around letting the work speak, and then I married into a family that had no ears for that kind of work. They only heard volume, and I had spent my life learning how to be quiet. I always believed the work should speak. I forgot that some rooms are built to keep quiet work invisible. Sitting in that dark den with Emma's words still ringing in my ears, I understood the trap I had built for myself. I had been so proud of not needing recognition that I had let the people I loved most learn how to overlook me. I did not want applause. I never did, but I was starting to think I deserved not to be erased, and there is a difference between those two things. The second strange thing arrived in Thursday's mail. It was a stiff envelope with a state seal printed in the corner. I almost opened it right there at the mailbox, but the trash truck was coming down the street, and I had to drag the cans out before it passed the house. By the time I came back inside, I dropped the envelope into the pile of unopened mail on the counter. Insurance renewals, a jury summons, Junk flyers, bills. The state envelope slid in among them and disappeared. I did not think about it again. I had bigger things on my mind, like whether I should even go to Walter's party at all. Then Bradley called. That was strange by itself. Bradley never called me twice in 1 month unless he needed something, or wanted to mock me with better timing. His voice was off this time, tighter than usual. He asked a quick question. He wanted to know whether I had worked in state government. I told him infrastructure. I asked why. Then he asked whether I knew anybody up at the Capitol, anybody current. I frowned. I reminded him I had been retired for 12 years. I asked why he was suddenly curious. There was a pause, and I could hear him breathing. Then he said no reason, told me to forget it, and said he would see me Saturday. He hung up. I stood in the kitchen with the dead phone in my hand. In 24 years, Bradley had never once been curious about my career. He had spent that entire time pretending it did not exist. And now, 3 days before his father's party, he wanted to know whether I knew anyone current at the Capitol. That was the first time Bradley Hargrove had ever sounded nervous while talking to me. I looked at the pile of mail on the counter, where the state seal was just barely visible at the edge of the stack. I should have pulled the envelope out and opened it right then, but I did not. So I walked into Saturday's party knowing far less than the people around me, and far more than they thought. Friday night, the pressure finally reached our own kitchen. Diane came home from another visit to her father, looking like she had cried in the car, and forced herself to stop before walking through our door. She set down her purse and did not take off her coat. She told me they wanted me to step back. I asked from what? She said from the trust, the paperwork, all of it. She pressed both hands flat on the counter and said her father thought everything should go through Bradley now, clean and simple. Walter wanted Diane to talk to me about it before the party. I felt the old reflex rising in me, the urge to say fine, whatever was easiest. I had said it 1,000 times before, but this time, instead of surrendering, I asked whether Bradley had mentioned that I had handled their taxes for 2 decades, for free. Diane said my name the way she did, when she wanted peace more than truth. She begged me not to make it hard. I told her I was not making it hard. I was asking why it suddenly had to change. She looked at me then, and there was something in her face I had never seen before. Not anger, exhaustion. The exhaustion of a woman who had been pulled in half by her family her entire life. She said they would never stop otherwise. She said I knew how her father was. If I fought it, he would dig in. If I just let it go, maybe it could stay peaceful. I asked peaceful for whom. She did not answer that. Then, almost in a whisper, she said maybe it would be easier if I just stayed quiet this once. There it was, from her too. The same instruction the whole family had given me for years, now coming from the one person I thought always saw me. I did not argue. I just nodded and went to bed first. But I lay there in the dark for a long time, listening to her brush her teeth, and I made a decision. Not a loud one. A quiet one. The last quiet decision I would make before everything changed. In the morning, I made coffee and watched the sun come up over the backyard. Diane found me at the table, still in my robe. I told her I would go to the party. Relief crossed her face. She thanked me. I told her again that I would go. I would smile. I would be polite to her father. I would carve whatever needed carving. But I would not apologize for the life I had actually lived. Not anymore. Not to anyone in that room. She sat down across from me slowly. I told her I had spent 24 years making myself small so her family could be comfortable. I told her I had done it because I loved her and because I thought it was kind. But I had heard our daughter call me a nobody and mean it as a kindness. Diane flinched. I told her I was not going to cause a scene because that was not who I was. But I was done shrinking. If they wanted me to step back from the trust, fine. I had never wanted their money. But I would not sit there and let them pretend I was furniture. Not in front of Emma. Not again. For a long moment, Diane did not speak. Then she reached across the table and held my hand, the same way she had when the invitation first came. She said, okay. Just that, okay. I did not know yet what the day would bring. I did not know about the phone calls I had ignored, or the envelope buried in the mail, or who was already on the road toward that hall. All I knew was that I had crossed some line inside myself, and there was no walking back over it. I got up, showered, and put on my good gray suit, the one I had worn to ribbon cuttings I never attended. Somehow, it felt right to wear it now. We arrived at the community hall early because Diane wanted to help set up. That was how I ended up in the back hallway near the coat room, and that was how I heard Bradley on the phone. He did not know I was there. He was pacing by the loading door, his voice low and frantic, nothing like the booming salesman voice he used at dinner. He told someone he needed until the end of the month. He said they could not call the note now. There was a pause. And then he said he was about to come into a position. His father was making it official that day. Once he was running the family accounts, he could move things around. Then he said the word trust. My stomach turned slowly. He asked for 30 days. He said he was good for it, that he had always been good for it, but his voice cracked on the last word. Then he begged the person not to embarrass him in front of his family. Please! He hung up. I heard him exhale, shaky and low, then watched from where I stood as he straightened his tie in the reflection of the window. A moment later, he put the smile back on and walked toward the main room, transformed again into the confident man everyone admired. I stood very still in that hallway. So that was it. The real reason for the announcement. Bradley was not being honored because he was responsible. He was drowning in a problem he could not solve. He needed Walter to hand him control of the family trust so he could pull money out of it to cover a debt he could not pay. And he needed it done today, in public, before anyone could ask too many questions. I thought about all the times he had called me nobody to lift himself higher. And there he was, the great Bradley Hargrove, begging a stranger on the phone not to embarrass him. The question now was whether Walter knew. The hall filled up fast. Neighbors, old store managers, business people, relatives, half the town it seemed. Walter had spared no expense. Round tables, white cloths, a small stage with a microphone at the front. Our table was by the door. Of course it was. Close enough to feel the draft every time someone came in. Bradley worked the room like a politician. At one point, he steered a cluster of well-dressed men toward us, business associates by the look of them. He introduced Diane as his sister, then clapped a hand on my shoulder and introduced me as her husband, Calvin, retired, a nobody really, but a sweet guy. The men chuckled. One of them shook my hand without really looking at me. Bradley kept going. He told them not to mind me, said I was furniture, but comfortable furniture. More laughter. Diane's hand tightened around her napkin. A month earlier, I would have laughed along. I would have made myself smaller to keep peace at the table. Instead, I looked Bradley in the eye and held his gaze a beat too long. I told him that comfortable furniture carried a lot of weight, and he would be surprised by what it was holding. A smile flickered on his face, just for a second. He did not know I had heard him in the hallway, but something in my tone made him uneasy. He covered it by laughing louder and moving the group along. Diane stared at me and asked what that was. I told her it was nothing, just me deciding not to be furniture. Across the room, Emma watched from where she stood with her cousins. She had caught the exchange. I saw her tilt her head, studying me like she was noticing something she had missed before. Up at the head table, Walter tapped a fork against his glass. The room began to hush, but he was not ready to speak yet. He was only calling people to their seats. Dinner would come first, he announced. Speeches after. That gave me one last chance, and I took it. I found Walter near the head table, briefly alone, straightening his jacket. He was 80 years old and still stood ramrod straight, cold as a bank vault. I wished him a happy birthday. He gave me a short nod and called me by the wrong pronunciation of my name, the way he always had when he wanted to remind me I was not worth learning correctly. I told him I had heard he was reorganizing the trust. His eyes sharpened. He said it was family business. I told him I was family, 24 years. I reminded him I had handled his taxes since before Bradley could read a balance sheet, and I said I would like to stay involved, even in a small way. For a moment, Walter just looked at me the way a man looks at a salesman who has knocked on the wrong door. Then he said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse, that I had always been adequate, a decent man. Diane could have done worse. He patted my arm. Then he said serious matters required someone with a real head for the world, and that we should leave it there. Adequate. He said it like it was a gift. I started to answer with respect, but he repeated that we should leave it there and turned away to greet another guest. I stood alone by the head table for a moment as the noise of the party swelled around me. I had tried. I had done it the right way, quietly, privately, respectfully. And he had patted me on the arm, called me adequate, and turned his back. I walked back to the table by the door and sat down next to Diane. She asked how it went. I told her. He said no. I told her. He said I was adequate. She closed her eyes. I looked at the door beside me. I had no idea it was about to open. While the salads were being served, Emma slipped into the empty chair beside me. She had something rolled up in her hand. When she set it on the table, I recognized it before she opened it. A photocopy of an old newspaper page. She said her mother had told her where the shoebox was, and that she had gone through it that morning before we left. My chest tightened. I started to say her name, but she asked me to let her talk. She unrolled the page. It was a yellowed clipping in the copy, a headline about a regional bridge project. In the photo, there I was, the same riverbank, the same hard hat. Beneath it, a caption with my name. Emma said the article said I led the engineering team for the Miller's Crossing Bridge, the one we drove over to get to her grandfather's house. I told her it was a long time ago. She said there was a letter in the box too, from a county thanking me. Her voice wavered. She said the letter explained that the bridge let ambulances reach 4 towns that used to be cut off in floods. It said people were alive because of it. I did not say anything. I could not. Emma asked why I had never told them. I looked at my daughter, 22 years old, holding proof of a life I had spent decades keeping in a box. I told her that telling people had always felt like asking for something, and I had never wanted to ask. Her eyes filled. She glanced across the room at her cousin Tyler, then back at me, and I watched something rearrange itself in her face, shame turning into something fiercer. She said they called me a nobody. Then she said that was not who I was. Before I could answer, a tone sounded over the speakers. Walter had taken the stage. At the same time, my phone began buzzing in my pocket. The Capitol number again. I silenced the phone. Whatever it was, it could wait. Walter stood at the microphone, tapping it twice until the room quieted. But Emma was not done. She leaned close, gripping my arm, and asked why they were calling now. The bridge, the letter, the phone in my pocket. I told her I did not know. And that was the truth. 2 ignored phone calls. An envelope buried in the bills. Bradley asking whether I knew anyone current at the Capitol. The pieces were all there, scattered around me, and I had not put them together because for 12 years, nothing official had touched my life at all. Diane was watching me too. She had heard Emma. She had seen the newspaper clipping on the table. I could see her doing the same math I was doing and coming up just as confused. She whispered my name and asked what was going on. I told her I genuinely did not know. Up on stage, Walter cleared his throat and began. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about building the hardware business from one store. He talked about legacy, about how a man's life is measured by what he leaves behind and who he leaves it to. Then he said that today, he wanted to talk about the future of the family. Bradley straightened in his seat near the front, smoothing his tie, already wearing the modest little smile of a man who expected to be honored. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from the Capitol number. 4 words, "We are almost there." Then the initials M.E. I stared at the screen. M.E. I did not know anyone by those initials, at least not anyone I had spoken with recently. And what did almost there mean? Then, behind me, I heard the heavy double doors of the hall swing open. I need to back up for just a moment, because 3 days earlier, I had answered one of those calls. I simply had not told anyone. It was Wednesday night. The Capitol number had called for the 3rd time, and I picked up. A woman's assistant put me through. Then a voice came on the line that I had not heard in 12 years. She said my name warmly and told me it was Margaret Ellison. She asked whether I remembered her. Of course I remembered her. 12 years earlier, she had been a state representative fighting to fund the Miller's Crossing Bridge when almost everyone said the towns were too small to matter. I had spent 2 years giving her the engineering, the numbers, the maps, the cost studies, the safety data, every piece she needed to win that fight. She had won. The bridge had been built. Then she went on to bigger offices, and I went home, retired, and we lost touch. I said I heard she was Senator Ellison now. She laughed and told me I always did keep up. Then she said they were naming the south span of Miller's Crossing after the project lead. After me, there would be a small dedication that weekend, and she wanted to come shake my hand in person. She said she would not take no for an answer. I was so stunned I barely managed to give her the date and the town. I never connected it to Walter's party. I never told Diane because part of me did not quite believe it would happen, and the rest of me had learned long ago not to expect to be seen. So now, as the doors of the hall swung open, the truth landed on me all at once. The dedication, the party, the same weekend, the same small town. There was only one hall big enough to host an event like that. I turned around in my seat, and Senator Margaret Ellison walked into my father-in-law's 80th birthday party. She did not come alone. 2 aides followed her, and behind them was a man with a camera. She wore a navy suit and carried the kind of calm authority that fills a room before a single word is spoken. Heads turned. A ripple ran through the tables. People recognized her. I could hear it move across the hall in whispers. That was the senator. Senator Ellison. What was she doing there? Up on the stage, Walter froze in the middle of his sentence. He had not planned this. I could see his mind scrambling, delighted and confused at once. A state senator at his birthday celebration. What a triumph. What a sign of the family's standing. Bradley shot up from his chair like he had been launched. He smoothed his jacket and started toward her, hand already extended, that salesman's grin spreading across his face. Walter was coming down from the stage too, fast for a man of 80, reaching for her hand. Diane grabbed my arm and asked if I knew about this. I could not speak. My heart was pounding. She told me to sit by her, whatever happened. Her voice was shaking. Emma was half standing, looking from me to the senator and back, her mouth open. Senator Ellison stepped into the center of the room. Bradley reached her first, his hand thrust out, introducing himself as Bradley Hargrove and welcoming her with all the confidence he could gather. She gave him a polite, brief nod, the kind a person gives a stranger, and then she looked past him. Past Walter, too, who was nearly upon her, beaming. Her eyes swept across the crowded room, searching. Then they stopped on me, at the little table by the door, in my old gray suit, the retired nobody. Senator Margaret Ellison smiled the way you smile at someone you have genuinely missed, and then she began walking straight toward me. She walked right past Bradley. His extended hand hung in the air for a second too long before he dropped it. She walked past Walter, too, past the head table, past the cluster of important guests who had risen to greet her. The whole room watched her cross the floor. Bradley tried to recover and redirect her, telling her the head table was just up front. She said in a moment without slowing down. Walter stood there with his birthday speech abandoned at the microphone, watching a senator ignore him inside his own celebration. I got to my feet. My legs barely held me. She reached our little table by the door and stopped in front of me. Up close, she had aged the way strong people do, with more lines and the same fire in her eyes. She said my name, loud enough for the room to hear, and took my hand in both of hers. She told me it was so good to see me. The hall went quiet, truly quiet. There were 200 people in that room, and I believe everyone would have heard a fork drop. I managed to say her title and that she had come. She told me she had promised she would, and she did not break promises to the people who actually did the work. Then she turned, still holding my hand, and addressed the silent room. She apologized for interrupting and said she could see she had walked into a celebration, but she could not be in that town without finding me. I saw it then, the slow turn of every head toward me, toward the table by the door, toward the nobody. Bradley's grin had collapsed entirely. Walter's mouth was slightly open. Vanessa had gone pale, and Emma, my Emma, had both hands pressed over her mouth, her eyes shining. Senator Ellison said she wanted to explain. 12 years earlier, 4 towns in that county had been cut off every spring. The river flooded the old crossing. Ambulances could not get through. Families waited too long for help. She said she had been a young representative then, and she had wanted to build a new bridge, but everyone at the Capitol told her those towns were too small to bother with. Then she said one engineer disagreed. One engineer gave her 2 years of his life. The designs, the cost studies, the safety data, the maps, the numbers. He never asked for credit. He never came to a single press event. When they won, he went home without so much as a photograph. She gestured at me. Then she told the room that engineer was Calvin Reeves. She said the Miller's Crossing Bridge, the one most people there had driven over to reach that hall, existed because I had refused to let those towns be forgotten. Then she said that tomorrow morning, the state would dedicate the South Span in my name. A sound moved through the crowd. It was not applause yet. It was a collective intake of breath. 200 people realizing at once what they were looking at. Walter made it to the front of our table. He stared at me like he had never seen me before. Senator Ellison turned to him with a gracious smile that had a blade hidden inside it. She told Walter he had raised a wonderful daughter, but she had to tell him the most important man in the room was the one he had seated by the door. The silence broke into murmurs, gasps, the scrape of chairs as people stood to see better. Bradley had backed up against the head table, white as the tablecloth. The man who needed this night to crown himself was watching someone else receive honor he had never thought possible. The room came apart in slow motion. An older man at the second table stood suddenly and said my name sounded familiar. He said he had read about me years before, after the flood of 2011, because the new bridge had gotten rescue trucks to his brother's farm. Then he looked around and said I had helped save his brother's life and that he had been eating dinner across from me for 10 Christmases without knowing it. Voices rose all over the hall. People turned to neighbors, asking whether they had known. Nobody had. I had never said a word. Vanessa sat frozen, the gentle knife gone from her face, replaced by something close to fear. The woman who had worried I must be so bored had nothing to say now. Bradley tried weakly to say they had always known I did important work. He said it to no one in particular, and no one listened. For the first time in his life, Bradley Hargrove had no audience. Walter sank into the nearest chair. He was 80 years old, and the certainty had drained right out of him. He kept looking at me, then at the senator, then at me again, as if the math of his whole judgment refused to add up. Then Emma pushed back her chair, crossed to me, and threw her arms around my neck in front of everyone. She whispered into my collar that she was sorry. She said she should have known. She should have asked. I held my daughter while 200 people watched, and 12 years of quiet finally, suddenly, had a voice. Senator Ellison stepped back, satisfied, giving me the floor. The whole room was looking at me now, waiting. The nobody from the table by the door. For the first time in 24 years, I had everyone's attention, and I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I let go of Emma. I straightened my old gray suit. My hands had stopped shaking. I thanked Senator Ellison and reminded her that she knew I had never done it for thanks. She said she knew, and that was why I deserved them. Then I turned to face the room. Walter, Bradley, Vanessa, the neighbors, the business associates, the relatives, all of them watching the furniture stand up and speak. I said most of them had known me for 20 years. In all that time, they had decided who I was without ever asking. I said that was all right, because I had let them. I had thought staying quiet was the dignified thing to do. Then I looked at Walter. I told him I had never needed applause. I had never wanted the trust, or the money, or a seat at the head table. I wanted him to hear that clearly. This had never been about that. He could not meet my eyes. I told him I was done. I was done being the man he kept by the door. I had never needed him to celebrate me. I only needed him to stop pretending I was not there. And tonight, I was finished waiting for that. No one spoke. I told them I would still come to birthdays. I would still carve the turkey because somebody had to, and I was good at it. But I would come as myself, the whole man, not the version that made them comfortable. Then I turned to Bradley last. He braced himself. I could see it. He was certain I was about to expose what I had heard in that hallway. He thought I would tell everyone about the debt, the desperate phone call, the plan to get control of the trust. I did not. I simply wished his father a happy birthday and told him it was a good party. I watched confusion break across his face. He had spent years cutting me down, and there I stood in front of everyone, with every weapon in my hand, choosing not to use a single one. The party limped on after that, but it was never really Walter's party again. Senator Ellison stayed for 20 minutes. She sat at our little table by the door and let the whole room come to her, which meant the whole room came to me. People I had eaten Thanksgiving with for a decade introduced themselves as if for the first time. In a way, it was. When she left, she squeezed my shoulder and told me 8 o'clock tomorrow at the bridge. Bring your family. After she was gone, Walter tried to approach me. He hovered near the table, opening and closing his mouth. The man who had called me adequate an hour earlier did not seem to have the words. Finally, he said my name and told me he had never known about any of that. I told him he had never asked. I did not say it cruelly. I said it because it was true. He flinched, then admitted he supposed he had not. Bradley was a different story. He cornered me by the coat room, in the same hallway where I had heard him begging on the phone. His grin was gone. His face was gray. He asked whether I had heard him earlier, on the phone. I did not answer. He said I could have said something out there, in front of everyone, about the money, about the note coming due. His voice dropped as he began to say he had needed the trust. I finished the thought quietly. He needed it to cover a debt. He closed his eyes. Then he asked why I had not said it. He whispered that he would have, if it were him. I told him I knew he would have. That was the difference between us. Then I left him standing in the hallway, holding the weight of everything I had chosen not to say. Diane and I drove home in silence at first. Emma had gone ahead with friends, still glowing from everything that had happened. After a while, Diane said I had known about Bradley's debt. I told her I had heard him on the phone before the party. He was in serious trouble. The whole reason Walter planned to hand him the trust was that Bradley needed it. He was planning to move money out to pay off a loan he could not cover. Diane pressed her fingers to her lips. She understood then why he had been so desperate to be named. She asked whether her father knew. I told her I did not think so. She stared out the windshield at the dark road and said Bradley could have ruined the whole family, drained the trust, left her father without the money set aside for his care. I told her he still might try. The debt was real. The note was coming due. That night had not fixed any of it. It had only stopped him from getting his hands on the trust to do it. We rode quietly for a mile. Then I told her Bradley was not a monster. I had watched him beg a stranger on the phone not to embarrass him. He was a frightened man who had made bad bets and buried himself too deep to admit it. That was all most cruelty was, when you got close enough to see it. Somebody drowning, grabbing whatever was near. Diane wiped her eyes and said I should hate him after everything he had said about me. I told her I did not have the energy to hate him, and hate would not fix anything. We pulled into our driveway. The porch light was on. Emma had left it for us. Diane asked what I was going to do. I turned off the engine and sat in the quiet for a moment. Then I told her I was going to do the thing nobody had ever done for me. I was going to see him, really see him. I went to Bradley's house that Monday. He answered the door, looking like he had not slept. He started to say if I had come to gloat, but I told him I had come to help and asked if I could come in. He let me into a kitchen that was too big and too quiet. I sat down. He did not. I told him plainly that I was not going to give him money, and I wanted that clear from the start. His face hardened. He asked why I was there then. I told him I had spent 30 years untangling impossible problems for towns everyone else had written off, and a bad loan was nothing compared to a flooded county. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my jacket. I knew people, restructuring specialists, honest ones. I knew a man I trusted who handled exactly that kind of trouble without taking advantage of people who were already cornered. I had called him that morning, and he would see Bradley on Thursday as a favor to me. Bradley stared at the paper like it might bite him. I told him I would not rescue his pride, but I would help him keep his house. There was one condition. He muttered that here it came. I told him it was simple. He had to stop making my wife choose between us. He had to stop teaching my daughter that her father was a nobody. I did not need his respect for me, but Diane and Emma had earned his respect, and so had the truth. Bradley sat down heavily across from me. For a long moment, he did not speak. When he did, his voice was rough. He asked why I had always been so quiet all those years. He said if he had done what I had done, he would have told everyone every day. I told him I knew. Then I admitted I used to think that made me better than him. It did not. It only made me invisible. I slid the paper across the table and told him we had both gotten it wrong in our own ways. Then I told him to take the number. He took it. That night, Diane found me on the back porch, the same porch where I had heard Emma call me a nobody what felt like a lifetime earlier. She sat down beside me and did not say anything for a while. At last, she said she had told me to stay quiet the night before the party. She had told me it would be easier if I just stayed quiet this once. Her voice broke when she said she was ashamed of that. I told her she had been tired. Her family had put her in the middle for 24 years, and that was a hard place to stand. She said that was not an excuse. They had been wrong about me, and some part of her had let them be wrong because fighting it was exhausting and because I never seemed to mind. Then she turned to look at me and asked if I had minded all those years. I admitted that I had. I had minded. I just did not know how to say so without feeling like I was begging. She took my hand, the way she had at the kitchen table, the way she had in the hall. She said she knew who I was. She had always known. She said she had married me because I was the most decent man she had ever met, and then she had let her family act like decency was nothing. She squeezed my hand harder and said she should have stood beside me in that room every single time, out loud. She was done sitting between me and them. I said her name, but she told me to listen. From now on, she said, my seat was her seat. If they put me by the door, she would sit by the door. If they did not have room for the whole man, they did not have room for her either. I looked at my wife of 24 years, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like furniture in anyone's house. I felt like I had come home. Walter called the house on Wednesday. He had never once called me directly in 24 years. He said my name carefully and told me he would like to talk, if I would have him. He came by that afternoon, hat in his hands like a younger man. We sat in the den, the same room where I had sat in the dark after hearing my daughter call me nobody. For a while, he only turned his hat over and over. Finally, he said he had built everything he had by reading people fast, sizing them up quickly. It had served him in business for 40 years, and he had thought it never failed him. No flash, no ambition he could see. He said he had filed me away as harmless and forgotten to look again. Then he shook his head and said he had measured everyone by the wrong ruler, and he was too old to pretend he had not. It was not a perfect apology. He did not say he was sorry in those words, but for Walter Hargrove, it was an earthquake. I told him he had hurt me more than he knew, and that he had taught my daughter to overlook her own father. He winced and said he knew that now. I asked about the trust, and Bradley, something flickered in his eyes. He said he had decided to look closer at a few things. Bradley's situation, the accounts. He said he should have asked more questions before making any announcement. Then he paused and asked if maybe I would help him, since I had always handled the paperwork better than any of them. It was not the head table. It was not an award. It was an old man finally asking. I told him I would think about it, and I meant it. Not yes, not no. For the first time, I got to decide whether to give Walter Hargrove anything at all. After 24 years, that felt like its own kind of justice. A month later, there was another family gathering, a cousin's graduation party back at the same community hall. I noticed the change the moment Diane and I walked in. There was no table by the door waiting for me. Diane's hand was in mine, and we entered together, the whole man and his wife. Bradley was there. He had met with my contact and started untangling the debt the honest way. It would take years, but he had begun. He nodded at me across the room, a real nod. Earlier that day, I had heard him say in front of his own son that Uncle Calvin had built the bridge they drove over. Tyler's eyes had gone wide. Walter waved me toward the center table, the family table, the one I had never been offered in 24 years. Here's the part that surprised even me. I did not take it. Not because I was angry, but because I did not need it anymore. I thanked Walter and told him I thought Diane, Emma, and I would sit over by the window. I chose a table in the good light, with room for the people who mattered most to me. Not by the door, because they had put me there. Not at the head, because they had finally allowed it. just where I wanted to be. Walter looked at me for a moment, and then, to my surprise, he smiled. A small, real smile. He understood. He asked me to save him a seat if there was room. I told him there was room. Emma slid in beside me, grinning, and said it was a better table anyway, because it had better light. I told her it had better company. And for the first time in 24 years, sitting in a Hargrove family room, I was not waiting to be seen. I was just there, present, whole, a man at a table he had chosen, with the people who had finally chosen him back. Let me take you back one last time, to the morning after Walter's birthday party, before the reckoning with Walter or Bradley had even begun. The dedication. Emma rode with me out to Miller's Crossing at first light. Mist still hung over the river. The night before, I had finally dug the state-sealed envelope out of the pile of bills on the counter and opened it. Inside was a formal invitation to the dedication, my name printed in full and spelled correctly. I carried it in my jacket pocket. Senator Ellison was there with a small crowd, a ribbon, and a covered sign. When they pulled the cloth away, there it was, bolted to the south, span in plain steel letters, the Calvin Reeves span. Emma cried. I will admit, I came close. We did not stay long. Afterward, Emma and I drove across the bridge slowly, the way a person walks through a memory. The river ran high beneath us, the same river that used to cut 4 towns off from help every spring. Now ambulances crossed it in 3 minutes. School buses crossed it twice a day. People crossed it without ever thinking about the man who had fought to put it there. And I found that I was glad of that. That had always been the point. Emma asked whether it felt different now, having my name on it. I thought about it. Then I told her no. That was the strange thing. The bridge had not made me somebody. I had always been somebody. I had only stopped waiting for a room to tell me so. She reached over and put her hand on mine on the steering wheel, the way she had when she was small. We crossed to the far side, where one of the towns sat in the morning sun. A woman waved at us from her porch. She did not know who we were. She did not need to. I waved back. Behind us, the steel letters caught the light. Ahead of us was a town that existed because someone quiet had refused to let it be forgotten. I drove my daughter home across my own bridge, and I have never, before or since, felt more like somebody. If you have ever sat quietly at the far end of someone's table, hear me now. Your worth was never up for a vote. You do not have to shout to matter, but you do not have to stay where people keep you small, either. Some people will only see you when someone important points at you, but that does not mean you became valuable in that moment. It only means the room finally caught up to the truth. I spent decades believing my work should speak for itself, and in many ways, I still believe that. A bridge does not need applause to hold. A road does not need praise to lead people home. But a person is not a bridge. A person needs to be met with eyes open. A person deserves to be named correctly. A person deserves a seat that is not assigned as a quiet punishment. I do not regret the years I served without seeking attention. I regret the years I confused humility with disappearing. There is a difference between being quiet and being erased. There is a difference between not needing applause and accepting disrespect. I learned that late, but I learned it. And when I finally stood up, I did not become louder than I was. I simply stopped helping them make me smaller. That was enough. Sometimes, that is all it takes. Not revenge, not a scene, not a speech designed to wound everyone who wounded you. Just the steady decision to stand as the whole person you have always been. The people who love you may need time to see you. Some may apologize, some may never know how. Some may only understand when someone else opens the door and says your name in a voice the room cannot ignore. But your life is still your life before that door opens. Your bridge still stands before the sign goes up. Your work still matters before anyone claps. And if nobody has told you that lately, let this old retired nobody be the one to say it now. You are not furniture. You are not an afterthought. You are not the seat by the door. You are the years you gave, the problems you solved, the people you carried, the quiet good you did when nobody was watching. And one day, whether the room recognizes it or not, you get to choose your own table.